it's my error. Oh, there we go.
I forgot.
It's there. Okay.
I wasn't there a second ago. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newton.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Ms. Mackey?
Yes. I'd like to make a motion to nominate Yvonne McBride for chair.
Second.
Okay. It has been moved and properly second for the nomination of Yvonne McBride as your chair. Any discussion? If not, we will take the vote on the nominee, Yvonne McBride.
Would you like me to take the
Yes, ma'am.
McBride,
Yes.
Joe Walker,
No.
Barron,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. I thank you for your vote of confidence, and I look forward to working with each of you as well as the full council on moving the Renaissance program, or whatever name we choose to call. The initial purpose of the Renaissance initiative was for capital improvement and community revitalization. And that's what I hope we will continue to move forward, and to move forward in terms of making the best decisions for the citizens of Richland County, and to take all politics out of this process. With that said, we will go to item 5, which will be items for discussion. This meeting will be primarily informational due to we have a number of new members. In addition to that, this has been somewhat of a convoluted process. And I think it's important that we all get a fair understanding of where we are now and a little bit about the historical perspective of what happened. So, Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll turn the program over to you, the agenda over to you.
Thank you. So just to give members of the committee an opportunity to understand where we are now in this process, the Renaissance program at one point in time had gone into a deferral status. But sometime after, in early February 2019, I believe that deferral status was changed for certain elements of the Renaissance program. Specifically speaking, a couple of elements that we are looking at right now are related to the blight remediation and Gateway Pocket Park was one of those items, as well as the public safety annex, if you want to call it that, as well as some of those other elements associated with public safety, and including some of the other departments that we'll talk about here as a part of this process. To make it clear on the facilities that are associated with the historical nature of this program, there are the Columbia Place Mall. So when we say the Columbia Place Mall, I'm not quite sure if everybody knows what parts of the Columbia Place Mall that the county actually owns. So I'll talk about that here briefly. There are 3 box stores associated with the Columbia Place Mall that the county owns. And I'll name the box stores, and then I'll have members of the team give the actual locations of those stores. So we have the Sears box. That is one of the boxes that is owned by the county. We have the Burlington box, and then we have the Dillard's box. So those are the only parts of the box stores that are owned by the county. Also, when you think about the Columbia Place Mall, you think about the parking lot. The entirety of the parking lot is not owned by Richland County. So there is a portion of the parking lot that is associated with the box stores that we have. So if you've been out there and you've seen a mass vaccination site, and you look at how some of those things are set up, part of that is because of the ownership of the parking lot and who that ownership belongs to. So if I could just take a quick moment, I'm going to have Dr. Thompson, just for the sake of clarity, provide the actual physical addresses of those locations in case someone is wondering again where those items are located. Dr. Thompson?
Yes, sir. So Columbia Place Mall, the physical address is 7201 Road, 7201 Two Notch Road.
So that is one of the facilities associated with the Renaissance. Another facility associated with the Renaissance is the Haverty's building. So the Haverty's building is also a building that was acquired related to the Renaissance. And Dr. Thompson, if you could also just give the committee that information as well.
Yes, sir. That is 1430 West Colonial Life Boulevard. 1430 West Colonial Life Boulevard, near the intersection of West Colonial Life Boulevard and Bush River Road.
All right. And then you maybe have heard this facility, the old antique mall, was brought into one of the Renaissance properties. So the old antique mall is another facility that is associated with the Renaissance properties. So if you could also provide that information, Dr. Thompson.
Yes, sir. Old Antique Mall is located at 2956 Broad River Road, 2956 Broad River Road.
Thank you. So about those Renaissance facilities, I wanted to go ahead and share that with you just to provide some clarity on that whole process of what facilities are associated with the Renaissance facilities that the county acquired. And we'll talk more about that here a little bit later. In addition to those facilities, the county also gave some information about how some of those facilities should be utilized. Some of them they asked questions about, and some of them they gave some general information about what should happen with those facilities. So one of those facilities that has questions about its highest and best use is the old antique mall. So if you've seen language about that particular facility, it's because one of the things that was asked about was what is the highest and best use of that particular facility? And some of those discussions led to information associated with the Sheriff's Department and the Magistrate's Office. In terms of the public safety complex, the Columbia Place Mall box stores was where those items were considered to be looking to move into. So when we talk about some of the next steps and talk about some information that hopefully the committee can consider today, you can be thinking about, okay, when we look at our public safety complex, the thought was that the public safety complex will be physically located in the Columbia Place Mall. So that will be something that you can get your head around as we kind of look at some of the financials associated with this here a little bit later in this presentation. So just wanted to give you those specific information related to those facilities, because there have been questions about what property the county owns and what properties were related to the Richland Renaissance program. So I'll stop there and see if there are specific questions associated with those facilities that I can answer. Again, hopefully trying to give you some information from a very high level overview.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And I also would like to welcome Councilman Pugh to this meeting. Are there any questions for Mr. Brown? Ms. Newton?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Brown, for that overview. What I captured in my notes were the 3 box stores, Haverty's, and the old antique mall. Part of Richland Renaissance, the original vision, as I understand it, was also about taking facilities and expanding service provision to other parts of the county. And one of those areas that was part of the plan was the southeast region and parts of Lower Richland in the community. So you didn't mention any properties that were located in that area. Can you address whether or not there are additional properties that had originally been planned for service delivery in those areas, or if the idea was simply that we would build new facilities, just from my historical knowledge?
Yeah, so that's one of those things, Ms. Newton, quite frankly, I'll actually have to delve into the original plan to find out. Since I've been here, that's not one of the areas that when we talked about the program that has come up as a part of the facility that we'll be looking to address. So it may very well be, and one of the things I'll be doing as I talk about the next section as well, is talk about going back into the actual original plan and pulling out those elements that were brought out of deferment to make sure I really understand what were the intent of those facilities needs. So I don't have the answer for you right now, Ms. Newton, but I definitely will the next time we discuss what all facilities are included in the original Renaissance plan as originally presented.
Okay. Mr. Brown, I would like to add, and I'm trying to look at my notes, on May 14th, 2018, it was a motion made and passed to defer the Renaissance plan. And then on February 19th, 2019, during the regular session, and it was passed, a motion was made to bring the Renaissance out of deferment. And with that motion, there were 3 primary areas that we were looking at. And those were Dillard's, Sears, and Burlington. And Haverty's and Old Antique Mall were all to be revisited based on some of the minutes.
Thank you, Ms. McBride. So Ms. Newton, I certainly heard your question, and I will definitely make sure that we look at those items that were brought out of deferment, whether or not those items were brought out as a part of that process. And if not, then I'll make sure that you're aware of that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And just for my information, and we can have this conversation offline, even if they aren't part of being brought out of deferment, I would just like to understand what those properties are so that I have a complete picture. Thank you.
Understood. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Newton, and Mr. Brown, we will bring that information back to the full committee.
Yes, ma'am. So kind of moving on here under the item B on your agenda, which really focuses on the re-rivification initiative. So there was a plan that was already, I believe, presented and certainly developed concerning revivification, which includes blight remediation, and it dealt with the gateway pocket parks. And so I know you've heard a little bit about gateways, and we've talked about here briefly some of the blight remediation issues that we're trying to address. So a second component for the committee to know is that one of the things that I'm going to be doing is looking at that original presentation concerning the revivification to determine what elements are we already implementing and what elements remain left for us to implement and how we can move those things forward given this current context that we're in now. So I believe that is something, unlike the facilities maybe, that we could simply really move forward with because it was brought out of deferment. And there may be elements that we can just move forward with today. When you think about some of the current initiatives that we're already undertaking from the administrative standpoint, many of you are familiar with some of the requests that have not only come in through you in our departments, but related to us removing various areas that have been blighted with sitting materials, whether there's trash, whether there's illegal materials that are left behind, whether there's coordinated activities with some of our state partners. Those things related to blight removal are already underway. But from a larger perspective, I believe that the revivification plan also considered what type of enforcement measures needed to be additionally addressed in order to make sure that we could enhance our blight remediation efforts. So those are some of the things that I'm going to be delving into because we do have a couple of personnel who serve as code enforcement officers within the administration, but their code enforcement is not really specific to the blight remediation, so that we may need to actually address that area. Also, as a part of that, I believe we need to look at any enforcement measures that may need to or may need to be addressed to allow whether it's us to have other enforcement areas to address, such as whether it's our law enforcement personnel, as well as our code enforcement personnel, so that they can be unleashed to do the work that they need to do. So that's something I'll be looking into to see what we need to do with what we currently have and whether that requires requested action from me as the administrator concerning our enforcement codes and then the ability to maybe provide additional staff, not new personnel, but to empower staff to be able to deal with blight remediation from an enforcement standpoint. So I'll stop there and certainly open up the floor, Ms. McBride, to you and members of the committee.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Administrator Brown? If no questions, thank you, Mr. Brown, for that part of it. Are you able to answer any questions regarding the Gateway Pocket Light Removal Project and the historical corridor
So in
at this time?
yes, ma'am. In terms of the historical corridor, my understanding is that there has been funding, and that funding was the source of that funding is the hospitality tax funding, and that that funding either historically had rolled from year to year within the budget, and if that money did not roll, it would go back into the hospitality tax fund balance. So the funding for the historical trail or historical corridor is still within the county's budget. It has not been used or misplaced or anything like that. It would either be in a line item or the money would have gone back to the hospitality fund balance. So I can answer that concerning the historical corridor. Concerning the Gateway Pocket Parks, I don't believe that there's any action that's been taken on those. I do know that, again, there was funding associated with those pocket parks. That funding would also still be available. I believe that funding amount was roughly $250,000. And again, that funding would still be available also. And you asked me one other question, Ms. McBride. Do you mind repeating that?
Those were the two.
Okay.
And I just want to make note that we looked over some of the past minutes, and May 23rd, 2019, there was a special call meeting and the motion was made and voted in favor for the Gateway. And on May 23rd, 2019, a special call meeting, the same meeting, the historical trail, there was a motion made and a vote was in favor.
Yes, ma'am. So there is a lot of information within, even if within the area of the program that was brought out of deferment. But what I wanted to do today, in addition to just providing that general overview, I thought as we talked about really moving forward and what the council might be willing to do and interested in doing, that one of the prudent steps would be to understand our financial picture associated with the ability to address any of these matters, either in the short term or long term. So I have asked, as a part of one of the tasks that we had done, was we had engaged First Tryon, who is our financial advisor, to provide information so that you as members of the committee and member of the council could take a look and see what is our opportunity to address some of these facilities needs that have been addressed. So part of that was whether or not we could utilize public-private partnerships. So that is something that we are actively looking into and considering. And then the other part of that is what could the county do on its own if it chose to move some of these projects forward in conjunction with public-private partnerships or separate from public-private partnerships, so that you can look at that. So what I'm going to do right now, Ms. McBride, if it's okay with you, we could allow the screen share, and then we'll have First Tryon provide a financial picture which would detail and give you some good information about our financial ability to address some of these issues.
Okay, as soon as I let Ms. Barron has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Barron.
So if you could please just clearly identify and define the historical corridor trail and the Gateway Pocket Parks. What are they? Where are they? Just for us new kids on the block, if you could kind of let us know a little bit about that.
Okay, we're just doing this for general information. I don't know, Mr. Brown, how much information you have on that. And if not, we can come back later and give additional information.
I don't on the Gateway Pocket Parks. I don't know if those were things that were actually decided upon. But in terms of the historical corridor, my understanding is that was associated with the Lower Richland area. And now the details, like the mileage and where it's physically located, I cannot answer that for you right now, but I will take a look and try to provide that information. Well, not try, we'll look at that information and provide it to all the members of the council. And I'll plan to have that done by no later than the council meeting that we'll have on next week.
Okay,
Thank you.
All right. Okay, Mr. Brown, you were introducing the next presenters.
Yes, ma'am. Some of you may have had an opportunity to meet David Cheatwood before. If you have not, David Cheatwood works with First Tryon. First Tryon they are our financial advisors, and what they've done over the past few cycles is they've developed basically a book that represents how our county looks from a financial picture. So they're going to provide you some information that you can ask questions about, but I think would be graphically helpful to communicate what our capacity is from a financial standpoint. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Mr. David Cheatwood with First Tryon.
Great, thanks, Mr. Brown. Good afternoon, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces and names on the screen, so good to be in front of you again. I have a few slides, and it looks like I can share my screen, so bear with me 1 second while I pull up this PowerPoint here. Hopefully everybody can see this slide deck. As Mr. Brown said, we've got a few slides in here mainly focused on the county's outstanding debt. It's got a snapshot of all of your debt. There are a couple refinancing opportunities for savings, debt service savings that are out there that I want to bring to your attention. And then, as Mr. Brown noted, I want to end with just from a going forward basis, what your debt capacity is and the constraints that are out there, so you all can be aware of those as you make decisions on funding future projects, especially with debt going forward. So from and I'll blow this up a little bit here, a total debt outstanding, the county has just over $322 million of debt outstanding. This is made up of several different categories of debt. You have about $213 million of general obligation bonds, actually about $240 million of general obligation bonds. 100 million of that is paid from your transportation sales and use tax. That's the bond issue that the county did earlier this year to fix out over a 7-year period the remaining amount of a bond anticipation note that we have been rolling for a couple of years. And so that's the big number there, that $100 million series 2021. You also have 2 series of debt that they are GEO bonds, but they are paid from sewer revenues. You've got about 27 million outstanding on that front. Outside of general obligation bond debt, you have a few other types. You have one series of hospitality tax revenue bonds. That's where you are pledging just the hospitality tax. There's no other pledge of any other property tax, taxing power, or sewer revenues, et cetera. Purely a hospitality tax revenue bond. You have a installment purchase revenue bond that was issued back in 2019 for economic development purposes to buy land off of 77. That is secured with collateral and then subject to appropriation each year. The county council pulls from any legally available funds to make that debt service payment going forward. You have a series of special assessment revenue bonds for a special assessment district. For the Sand Hills district. I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. That is secured solely by assessments that are levied to entities in that special district. There are a few savings or potential savings out there that I'll highlight. And then lastly, you have one series of utility system revenue bonds. Those are secured solely by the water and sewer revenues. We issued those, the county issued those back in 2020, about 31 million outstanding. On this table, this is, we keep track of this. We're focused on not just the amount of debt you have outstanding, but when does that debt mature? We have the different maturity dates over time. And so you all have issued debt. All of these series date back, 10 plus years. And so they are rolling off, they're maturing at different points in time. That's important. We want to keep track of that. As you have debt rolling off, that naturally creates capacity to layer in new debt without or mitigating the impacts potentially there. So we want to track that. The call provision, this outstanding debt has different prepayment provisions. Every single series has a different provision. It depends on whether, at what point in time you issued that debt. If you issued in the public market, where you have an official statement and credit ratings, did you issue it directly to a bank? That all dictates what that call provision would be. That average coupon, that's the average interest rate you're paying on that particular piece of debt. And then lastly, just for reference, we've got the purpose what the proceeds of each one of those series of debt is used for. I've highlighted two options or two series of bonds here, your Series 2011 sewer system GO bonds, and then those 2004 assessment revenue bonds as potential refunding opportunities. When we look at that, we're obviously in a very low interest rate environment right now, and so that's a good time to refinance debt if we can. However, not all of your bonds can be refinanced. Certain bonds can't be refinanced till a date in the future, and so it's not you're not able to or economically able to do that right now. Other bonds were issued with a non-callable provision, so you can't prepay it, and so that's where all of this comes into play. This one is really attractive because you now can prepay that debt at any time without penalty. That's what the at 100% means. That means there's no prepayment penalty associated with doing that. So that's a great option there to refinance for savings. And the same story here on these assessment revenue bonds, you all can currently refinance those without prepayment penalty. Taking each one of these in turn, focusing on those 2011A sewer system GO bonds, there's just under $12.3 million outstanding on those. They mature in 2033, so you have about 11 years left to go on it. The current interest rate on those bonds is 3.92%. If you went out in the current public market environment, current interest rate environment, and sold the same structure, sewer system, general obligation bonds, where you pledge the full faith, credit, and taxing power of the county, but internally you're using sewer revenues to repay that debt, you all can generate some really significant savings there. We look at the savings on a couple of different ways. The first, and these are all highlighted here on the right, the first is what we call the present value savings. So taking all of your cash flow savings, present valuing those dollars back to today, you could save just over 1.9 million, which is 15.5% of the amount of bonds you're refunding. That percentage is a market percentage that we quote. The market looks at that. You know, really anything over 3% is a good level of savings. Certainly when you get into the double-digit range, that's a home run from a savings perspective. And so really high level. Probably more importantly to you all from a cash flow savings standpoint, we are realizing that 1.9 million in present value savings on a level annual basis. So we're not extending your maturity on this debt. We're not shortening it. We're just taking the same amount of savings each year that debt is outstanding. And that generates approximately $165,000 to $170,000 of debt service savings per year. And so from a total cash flow standpoint, about $2 million of savings. So really attractive there. That is net of estimated cost of issuance. So it's not like you would save $2 million and you have to pay $200,000 out. That's already baked in. I have estimates in there for what that would be, but a really attractive option out there for you all to generate some savings. And the fact that you all have been in the market recently a couple of times, earlier this year with the GO sales tax bond, and also last fall with the general obligation bond, you've got a really fresh offering document, which we call the preliminary official statement. You have fresh credit ratings. The rating agencies, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, have recently affirmed your AAA, the highest credit rating you can get. And so the process to refund those would be pretty streamlined in this case. You have 3 readings of a bond ordinance. We prepare an updated offering document, and you all could be in the market to lock in the rates on that as early as July if you wanted to move forward there. So that's one option that's out there. And then another one is with regard to those 2004 assessment revenue bonds. These are for the Village at Sand Hill Improvement District. These bonds were issued back in 2004 to fund various kind of infrastructure improvements back then. This is one where there are some good savings out there to be had. I will note, though, this does not directly impact the county's financials. You all are not paying this debt out of revenues from your system. You're paying it out of assessments that are levied on the property holders out there in that district. So while it doesn't necessarily impact the county's financials, it does, in turn, by lowering the debt service, in turn, it lowers the assessments that are levied for the remaining 15 years of this. And so that's an opportunity that's out there. The current interest rate on those bonds is 6.2%. That's a very high interest rate, but at the time in 2004, it's pretty natural to see a higher interest rate on an assessment revenue bond because bondholders, this is not backed by the county in any way. This is just backed by assessments paid by property holders. And so it's dependent on development and all of that occurring out there. And that's been, to my understanding, I'll admit I'm not intimately familiar with the Village of Sand Hill district there, but from what I understand and looking at the reports that are generated each year, that district is doing well. The large majority of property holders are paying their assessments on time. And so that would then be attractive to investors in the current market. You'd be able to lower that interest rate from 6.2% to approximately 4.6% is an estimate. With that, you'd be able to generate savings. Again, we're focusing on those same couple of ones that are highlighted on a net present value basis, about 1.8%. On an annual basis, about $170,000. Coincidentally, the same amount that you're looking at on the GEO sewer system bonds for total savings of $2.5 million. That one would take a little bit longer to get to market and lock in that rate. You've got that offering document is a little bit more involved. We have to get into more of an overview of the improvement district and some history on the assessments there and how that's been going. And so that'll just take a little bit more time versus your more plain vanilla general obligation bond issue. But two very good options out there for the county to consider and lock in some low interest rates and debt service savings. From a going forward basis in terms of future capacity, there's two ways to look at this, two constraints that you all need to be aware of when you're thinking about this. And what we're talking about here is your general obligation bond debt capacity. So this is focused on what we refer to as your 8% debt limit. The entities in South Carolina can issue general obligation bonds without voter approval up to 8% of the assessed value in the county. Looking at the most recent assessed value in the county, you all have about $1.7 billion of assessed value. 8% of that amount means your 8% debt limit, the amount of GEO bonds you can issue without voter approval, is about $141 million. As of today, you all have about $46 million outstanding that you've issued under that debt limit. That includes the bonds you issued last fall. What that means is you have a remaining debt limit of $94.6 million. And so you all, if you chose, could issue up to $94.6 million without voter approval and remain under your 8% debt limit. That debt limit will grow if you don't do anything else. That debt limit will grow over time by two factors. One is just natural growth in your assessed value. This number is going to get bigger as it has been each and every year. Y'all seen good consistent growth with your assessed value. So as your assessed value gets bigger, so too does your debt limit. The other thing that'll increase your debt limit is the existing debt that's outstanding. It's $46.6 million today. However, you're paying that debt down on an annual basis. And so as you pay that debt down, this number goes down as well. So those two components, without you all issuing any other debt, will naturally grow your 8% debt limit going forward. The other constraint that's out there, and this is really a self-imposed constraint, and sorry, let me finish up on this debt limit. This shows the picture of with some an estimated increase in or assumption in the growth of your assessed value and your existing debt paying down over time, you can see that your capacity is really going to grow, certainly get up over $100 million fairly quickly. The gray here is what's left in terms of capacity under that debt limit. So you've got a lot of room there to fund additional projects. The other constraint that's out there is a self-imposed one. And this is how much you all want to levy in your debt service, how many mills you want to levy for debt service. Historically, y'all have levied anywhere from 10 to 11 mills. Currently, you all levy 10 mills for debt service. Based on your value of the mill of about $1.7 million, you all are generating about $17 million to pay general obligation bond debt service. And so with that 10 mil, this blue line shows you what that $17 million, or I'm sorry, what that 10 mils would generate over time, assuming a 1.7 mil starting value growing at an assumed rate. going forward. And so you can see how that 17 million is growing over time. You go out 20 years with natural growth based on a conservative assumption, 10 mills should generate $20 million per year. This teal is your current debt service structure under the outstanding GO bonds that you have that are paid from your 10 mil debt service levy. And so what you can see here is you have a little bit of capacity in this upcoming year, 2022, same in 2023. And then as debt rolls off in 2023, you all start to generate a lot of capacity if you stay at 10 mils. Now, what would in reality happen is if you all didn't issue any other GO bonds, your county auditor is going to say, well, you can't keep levying 10 mils if you really only need something much less than that. And so you would just reduce your debt service millage, not to be confused with your operating millage. You would reduce your debt service millage to match what your general obligation bond debt service requires. This is where that self-imposed constraint comes in. If you all wanted to keep it at 10 mils, I'll show you how much you can issue and stay under that level. If you didn't issue anything else, this is naturally going to go down because you don't need it all. In terms of that debt capacity going forward, if you stayed at the 10 mil levy, and if you looked at how much could I borrow over a 20-year period, repaying that back in annual installments, you all actually today or this year, you all could issue all the way up to your 8% debt limit. You could issue $94.6 million. The way we would do that would be to basically issue that debt and be interest only for a couple of years. And then once this debt rolls off in 2023, you have a nice cliff there. You'd be able to stay under that 10 mil levy, that $17 million a year plus natural growth. You'd be able to stay under that because you have a lot of capacity out here. And so if we wouldn't have to get into too much structuring here, just basically a couple of years of interest only, and then you make level annual principal and interest payments, you could issue that full amount. And so if you ask me today, what's my debt capacity? I would say it's just under 95 million. That's the 8%. And that is the amount that you could issue and also stay under 10 mils. Now, if you all said we want to reduce our millage to 8 mils, then that's going to change my answer. It would be something a little bit less than the 94 million. And so that's where those two components come into play. The constitutional 8% debt limit that you absolutely can't go over without voter approval, because as a reminder, you all can issue any amount if it's voter approved. You're not limited to that 94.6 million. But without voter approval, you can go up to 94.6 million. The other variable is what you want your debt service millage to be. I know I hit you with a lot of information here, so I will pause and certainly take any questions that you all have.
Madam Chair, can I be recognized?
Yes, please.
Mr. Brown, this is extremely comprehensive, and I think it's far beyond just the Renaissance plan. And I didn't realize this was going to be on the agenda. I think this is not, should be more than just something for an ad hoc committee. I mean, this should have been a finance committee matter or a full council matter, but because it's so comprehensive and it covers everything about our finances, not just the Renaissance. So it's important that I think that this goes before at some point. The comprehensive approach here be presented to the full council meetings so everybody can get the gist of it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mr.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston, we agree, and Mr. Brown understood that, but I wanted to give the Renaissance Committee, since we're possibly dealing with bonds, with capital improvement and so forth, an idea as they began to deliberate on different issues. So I agree with you, but that's why we brought it to this committee.
Madam Chair, may I be
Yes,
recognized?
ma'am. Ms. Mackey?
Thank you. I think it was a slide before, I'm not sure because it changed, but the ones where you had, it was the two options where you showed the 10 mil, 8 mil, and keep going. This one, okay. So based off these charts and the projections, does the projection drastically change if we move forward with the refinance of the two bonds that you mentioned, or is this pretty much about the same level? Does it not drastically change it at all?
Good question. It's actually not going to change at all. But the first on that, on the 2004 assessment bond, that is not paid from debt service millage. And so that would not impact this at all. The same with those 2011 sewer system general obligation bonds. While those are general obligation bonds, you're paying those out of sewer system revenues. You're not paying them out of your debt service millage. And so that general obligation bond refunding actually helps your sewer system, not this analysis here. So it actually wouldn't change with those savings.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is Leonardo. May I be?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So Mr. Cheatwood, this is some really helpful information, and I did certainly want the Renaissance Committee to be able to see our capacity. I think we got about 15 minutes left, so if you could wrap up here, we certainly will be bringing this before a full council at some point in time as well. So this will not be the only time they're able to see this, and I believe we also sent this presentation to them as well. But if you could kind of wrap up with, again, the idea about what we're able to do given various scenarios, and to kind of talk about how we can have a session where we can look at a lot of different scenarios. These are just some that you were just showing us right now.
That's good. I mean, you really summarized it for me. I'd leave you with right now, as of today, your debt limit is just under $95 million. You actually could issue that full amount and stay under your current 10 mil debt service levy. I would typically caution someone against using their full amount of their 8% debt capacity, just because that really limits some flexibility going forward if you all, either in an emergency situation or some other opportunity came up where you wanted to use it. So I wouldn't recommend you use every bit that's out there, but technically you have $95 million. You can do all that. And you can issue any amount under that. You can stay at the 10 mil levy, even if you issue under that, because what we want to keep in mind is kind of what you also have down the road, and not get boxed in with a lower millage and then have to increase it again in a couple of years. And so we have a model that we've built for the county. Mr. Brown has seen that model. We can run through various scenarios. And so if you all think about some and want to see those, we can certainly show them to you.
Thank you. That's the conclusion of the presentation, Ms. McBride.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Are there any questions, Mr. Malinowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cheatham, could you send us something that would show what would happen if the mill rate was reduced from 10 to 8, please?
Yes, just in terms of the maximum capacity you'd be able to issue, how much could you issue if it was reduced to 8 mils?
Actually, I'm more or less thinking yes, that, but I'd like to see what happens in the way of, the income to the county if it's reduced to 8 mils from this 10. Right now, you said it's about what, 17 million that we're producing from that 10 mils. What would we produce at 8 mils? And you can just send that to me later. And like Mr. Livingston, I'd like to thank you. I think that was a very detailed report, and I'm very impressed with the info you gave us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown and Mr. Cheatwood, given that we do have some capital improvement projects under the Renaissance, are we would you say that we're in a pretty good position at this point?
Yes, I would say you're in a great position. You've got a lot of flexibility there, just given the extremely high and growing value of your assessed value. You've got a very healthy 8% debt limit. You don't have a lot of debt outstanding that's issued under that debt limit, and so that gives you a lot of flexibility going forward. You have AAA credit ratings, so that have been recently affirmed by the 2 rating agencies, and so they recognize the really strong financial position that the county is in, and so you've set yourself up very well to consider funding future projects. And the benefit in South Carolina and the way the structure is, any sort of additional borrowings that you all would have would be paid from this separate debt service millage. And so from a credit rating standpoint, from an investor standpoint, it's not impacting your operating budget because you have separate debt service millage to pay for those projects, assuming, again, you choose to issue it under that debt service millage limit. And so it's, in my eyes, as long as you have the revenues there to pay for it, and you've got a good, healthy 8% debt limit and good capacity going forward, it keeps you in a very good spot.
And Ms.
Thank you.
My response would simply be that hopefully what this has done was show the members of the committee and council who are present some of the options that you have to work with both public-private partnerships as well as options that you have for funding a potential project if the council so chose to. So that was the main focus of presenting this particular funding picture for you. So hopefully it's been helpful.
Thank you. It has been very helpful. And Mr. Brown, I would like to thank you and Ms. Myers and the other staff that worked with me in putting together this agenda. Are there any other questions? Okay, so we have a few minutes left. Mr. Brown, does that conclude your presentation, or is there other areas?
Yes, ma'am, that really concludes the presentation. I know you had an item that talked about informational review for Renaissance motions. And I think, again, that was something that we were just trying to provide to the committee members so they could get some wherewithal of some of the things that have happened over time and kind of where we are now. So hopefully after this meeting, we can really start talking about how we move things forward from a practical standpoint, looking at our resources, both public-private partnerships and internal resources to the county. And this will give us some real footwork in moving things forward in whatever direction or a combination of directions the county wants to move in.
Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Newton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to clarify, Mr. Brown, from your perspective, when you say that concludes your presentation, are you saying that that concludes item 6 that's on our agenda?
Yes, ma'am. I'm saying that concludes item 6 on our agenda.
Okay, well, I don't know that we have time for this, Madam Chair, but I guess I was under the impression when I looked at this heading on the agenda that that would include staff giving an update on their current actions in terms of previous motions that have been approved. For example, conducting a review of our facilities and our facilities needs, et cetera. Is that some information that we're also going to receive today?
No, we knew that what we were trying to do is to bring you up to date on the prioritize some areas, and then that we will come back at another time once everything was halfway finalized. So we knew that we would not be able to provide all that information, but at least to give you an overview of where we are now.
And
okay.
In terms of that, Ms. Newton, real quick, we are pulling together all of the county's properties to determine what all properties we have as a part of that. So just that is something that is currently ongoing, ma'am.
And I guess too, with the Renaissance motions, I sent you Miss Mathis, we sent them under separate cover, just a summary of some of the motions, and you will have the opportunity to review them this week or next week. And then at the next meeting, working with Mr. Brown, we can come and discuss some of the things that you have mentioned, Ms. Newton, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
If there are no other questions, then again, I want to thank everybody for participating and attending this meeting. And I look forward to us successfully moving forward. One of the issues we did not mention, and you will see it in the motions, was the rebranding or the possibility of rebranding the Renaissance program. So that is another issue. And that was directed through a motion to Mr. Brown too, but he wants to bring this back to the committee so that we can discuss. So those are other things that we will be looking at. But we only knew that we had an hour, and I thought that was very important that you got an overview first. With that said,
Madam Chair.
yes, ma'am.
Move to adjourn.
It has been
Second.
moved to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, everybody can stay. It's been moved and properly second, and I'll see you in 3 minutes, 7 minutes. The meeting is now adjourned.